The summer of 1966 was unusually warm in the quiet town of Pontefract, West Yorkshire. A light breeze drifted through the tree-lined streets of Chequerfield Estate, where new homes stood in crisp rows, red brick glowing under the golden sun. Joe and Jean Pritchard had just moved into number 30 East Drive with their 2 children, 15-year-old Philip and 12-year-old Diane. It was supposed to be a fresh start. The semi-detached council house was modest but modern, 2 floors, a garden, and a peaceful neighbourhood. The kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. At least, that's what they thought. Joe was at work when it began. Jean had taken Diane on a short trip to visit relatives, leaving Philip alone with his grandmother, Sarah Scholes. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy, polite and grounded. Sarah adored him and never imagined anything strange would happen during their stay. But on that afternoon, something odd occurred in the kitchen. While Sarah was preparing tea, a fine white powder began falling from the ceiling, snow-like particles that coated the linoleum floor. At first, she thought it was plaster. Maybe a pipe had burst upstairs, but there were no leaks and the ceiling looked intact. Then came the water. Small pools started forming beneath the kitchen sink, clear, still water that appeared from nowhere. Sarah cleaned it, only to find new puddles seconds later. There was no leak. The plumbing was perfectly dry. Confused, she called for Philip. Together they checked the taps, the pipes, even the refrigerator. Everything was dry. The air grew thick with tension. When Sarah turned her back, a cupboard door slowly creaked open. No wind, no draft, just movement. She shut it firmly. Then it slammed open again, violently, as if pushed from the inside. That was the moment Sarah knew something was wrong. She rang Jean in a panic, asking her to come home early. The rest of the evening was uneventful, but the unease lingered. The next day, things escalated. Jean returned and dismissed the events as odd but explainable. Maybe faulty pipes, maybe nerves. But then the kitchen lights began switching on and off. Doors that were latched swung open. Cold drafts slithered through rooms with no open windows. The strangest incident came when a large plant pot in the hallway tipped over, on its own. It didn't fall naturally, it was thrown, soil scattered across the carpet. And then, with no one touching it, the pot righted itself, lifting off the floor and setting down upright. Diane, who had been watching from the stairs, screamed. Soon after, heavy thudding began at night, slow, deliberate footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. The family started to sleep with the lights on. Jean tried to remain calm, but fear was taking root. She called in a repairman to inspect the wiring and plumbing. He found no faults. "Everything's in order, Mrs. Pritchard," he said, though he admitted he felt uncomfortable in the house. "Feels cold in here," he mumbled before leaving. One evening, Philip invited a friend to stay over. Teenagers often romanticize the strange, but even they couldn't deny what happened that night. While lying in bed, they heard the wardrobe creak. A low groan echoed from inside. Then the door burst open, and a pair of gloves flew out and landed at Philip's feet. They ran. Jean contacted the local council for help, then the church. A priest came to bless the house. He stood in the living room, reciting prayers, sprinkling holy water. But halfway through, the walls shuddered violently. A framed picture of Jesus lifted from its nail and crashed to the ground, glass shattering across the carpet. "I can't help you," the priest muttered afterward, clearly shaken. "This is beyond me." The press got wind of the story. Word spread through Pontefract that the house on East Drive was haunted. Neighbours whispered, friends stopped visiting. The Pritchards were left to face it alone. Yet through all the chaos, the family noticed something consistent. The entity, whatever it was, seemed fixated on Diane. She began waking up with scratches on her arms. Once, she was found unconscious at the foot of the stairs, claiming something had pushed her. Another time, she was yanked by her hair across the landing in front of her screaming mother. Despite everything, the Pritchards refused to leave. It was their home, and they hoped, naively, that it would stop. But the house had other plans. Late one night, as Jean stood in the hallway outside Diane's room, she saw it for the first time. A figure. Standing motionless at the end of the hall was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a long black robe. No face, just darkness beneath the hood. The figure vanished when Jean gasped. Not faded, vanished. That's when she knew they weren't just dealing with bumps in the night or flying objects. They were sharing their home with something ancient and deeply malevolent. The sight of the black-robed figure haunted Jean Pritchard's mind long after it vanished. She kept the memory to herself at first, unsure if it had been a waking dream or her eyes playing tricks on her. But the oppressive atmosphere in the house was unmistakable. The temperature dipped inexplicably even during warm afternoons. Rooms would fill with the scent of decay and something worse, something unnameable. Diane changed too. She stopped smiling. Her laughter, once a constant in the house, disappeared completely. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes and her appetite faded. She complained of someone watching her at night. "He's always in the corner," she whispered once to her mother, pointing to a shadow in the room. "He doesn't blink. He just stares." Jean stood by her daughter's bed that night, with a crucifix in one hand and a trembling prayer on her lips. The shadow didn't move, but it didn't leave either. One morning, the family awoke to find the entire kitchen in disarray. Chairs stacked on the table. Every cabinet open. Plates shattered on the floor in deliberate patterns. A sticky green foam oozed from the sink and covered the countertops. The smell of rot was unbearable. Philip, trying to help clean, was struck across the face by an invisible hand. He staggered back, clutching his cheek. A deep, red welt began to swell as he screamed. That same week, Joe invited a local paranormal investigator named Fred Batt to observe the house. Fred arrived skeptical, carrying notebooks and equipment. He didn't believe in ghosts, but after only 10 minutes inside, that changed. Fred sat in the living room with Jean when the door to the cupboard flew open with a deafening bang. A gust of icy air blew out of it, extinguishing the lamp. Before Fred could react, the curtains ripped themselves from the rods, flying across the room like flags in a hurricane. Later in his report he wrote, "I was not pushed, I was thrown from my chair. I do not believe any man or child in that house was capable of it. Something wanted us out." Fred left and never returned. More neighbours began talking. "It's the monk," said one elderly woman, Mrs. Featherstone, who had lived nearby for decades. Before those houses were built, there were gallows and an old monastery right on that land. She told John a story. In the 16th century, a Cluniac monk had been convicted of heinous crimes. Legend said he murdered a young girl, possibly his own niece, and was executed. He was buried beneath the gallows right under what was now the Pritchards' house. John wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the entity's focus on Diane, its violence, its fury, echoed that dark past far too closely. Then came the worst night. Diane was in the bath. Jean was downstairs folding laundry when she heard a scream, sharp, terrified, primal. She ran up the stairs 2 at a time and kicked open the bathroom door. Diane was unconscious in the tub. Water overflowed onto the floor. Red marks encircled her neck, deep enough to bruise. Joe arrived moments later and pulled her out. She was breathing, but barely. She claimed something had grabbed her from behind and pushed her head under the water. "It had hands like ice," she whispered through sobs. "I couldn't move." That night, Jean and Joe made the decision to sleep in the same room as Diane, but the monk didn't care. In the dead of night, the bedroom door opened by itself. Jean felt a presence before she saw it. The room grew cold, the air thick. The crucifix on the wall spun upside down and fell. A deep, guttural growl filled the room. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Then from the hallway, heavy footsteps. 1, 2, 3. Each step closer, deliberate, as if the entity wanted them to feel the time between beats of their own hearts. The door creaked wider. then silence. The monk did not enter, but they all saw him standing at the threshold, black robes rippling as though in some invisible wind. His face was still hidden beneath that endless hood. Jean prayed. Joe held his daughter. Diane wept into her pillow. Then the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the window panes. For the next week, the entity went quiet. The house seemed calm. Hope returned briefly. They even joked about it, calling the ghost Fred to mock it, anything to reduce the fear. But the black monk wasn't gone. He was waiting. On Diane's 13th birthday, family and a few brave friends gathered at the house. Cake, balloons, gifts. It was almost normal again. But midway through the small party, the living room mirror shattered, the lights cut out. And in the sudden darkness, Diane screamed. She was lifted from the floor by something unseen and hurled across the room into the wall. Everyone saw it. Her uncle tried to grab her mid-air and was thrown back by an invisible force that left bruises on his chest. The birthday cake ignited on its own. Smoke filled the house. The party ended in chaos. The morning after Diane's birthday, the house on 30 East Drive sat in an eerie silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, breathless stillness that hangs in the air before a storm. John sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scorched remains of the birthday cake. Burnt icing clung to the walls. The floor still bore the outline of where Diane's body had struck. Across the table, Joe was on the phone, his voice low and strained. He was calling the church. They had avoided that step before, afraid of what it might admit. But now, with Diane increasingly targeted, they were out of options. Father Peter, a young Catholic priest from a nearby parish, agreed to visit. He arrived that afternoon in a battered car, wearing a long black cassock and carrying a small leather case. He looked calm, too calm. Jean thought, he doesn't believe us. But that changed the moment he stepped through the front door. He paused, blinking hard, and muttered a quiet prayer before continuing inside. Later, he would admit to feeling a deep pressure on his chest, as if something unseen was trying to push him back out. Father Peter walked through the house slowly, making notes. "You say it focuses on your daughter?" he asked. John nodded. He nodded back, almost mechanically, and opened his case. "I will perform a minor rite," he said. "Let's see how it reacts." He began in the hallway with holy water and incense, reciting Latin prayers under his breath. He moved to the stairs, then into Diane's bedroom, blessing every corner. But something was wrong. In the middle of the prayer, the candles blew out. The crucifix in his hand grew hot. He winced, dropped it, and the metal cross clattered to the floor, its shape twisted and blackened, as if scorched. Suddenly a loud thud echoed from the attic. Then another and another. The pounding intensified, relentless, angry. Father Peter picked up his prayer again, louder this time. The door to Diane's room slammed shut behind him. Joe rushed forward and turned the knob, but it wouldn't move. Jean screamed Diane's name. Inside the room, Father Peter was facing something no training had prepared him for. The temperature plummeted, his breath misted in front of him. Then he saw it, standing in the corner, not moving, not speaking, just standing. The monk. His face was as always, a shadow under the hood. But this time, Father Peter felt the eyes, not saw, felt, a deep hatred, something older than the church, older than England itself. The air rippled, then everything exploded. Books flew from the shelves. The mattress lifted and slammed against the wall. Diane, in the far corner, was thrown into the air, suspended for 3 seconds, and dropped onto the bed. Her eyes rolled back. She began to convulse. "Leave this child!" the priest shouted, raising his voice, holding up the Bible with shaking hands. And for a moment, it worked. The noise stopped. Diane dropped still. The air stilled. The monk was gone. Father Peter staggered out of the room, pale and dripping with sweat. "You need to leave this house," he said to Jean. "Immediately." "We can't," Joe said. "This is our home." "Then," the priest said, gathering his things quickly, "God help you?" He never returned. For days afterward, the house remained quiet. No knocks, no apparitions. It felt like a truce, but not a victory. Jean knew it wasn't over. The monk wasn't gone, he was simply waiting. The family began documenting the events in detail, writing down every unexplained noise, every strange temperature drop, every shadow that didn't belong. A pattern began to emerge. The activity was strongest around the anniversary of the monk's execution, early September. That week each year was a storm. The rest of the time it was unease, creaks, whispers, shadows caught in mirrors. Diane's moods still shifted erratically. The entity seemed embedded in her life now, watching, waiting. They tried everything, more prayers, visiting different churches, even hiring a psychic medium who refused to enter the house after stepping onto the porch. "There's blood on this ground," she said, "deep, old, and it still screams." By now, friends refused to visit. Philip moved in with relatives. Jean and Joe stayed only for Diane's sake, but their marriage began to strain under the pressure. Sleep was rare, arguments common, and then suddenly it all stopped. No noises, no floating objects. Diane smiled again. The house, for the first time in years, felt normal. It was almost more disturbing than the activity itself. They waited for the next September, bracing themselves. Nothing happened. They waited for a sign, for a creak, a whisper, a cold breath on their necks, but the monk didn't return. The house felt empty, but not in a peaceful way, in a watching from the dark way. Jean still kept holy water near the bed. Joe still left a Bible in every room. Diane never stayed home alone, and no one went into the attic. In the years after the activity faded, the Pritchard family slowly tried to rebuild their lives. Diane grew older, more withdrawn but functional. Joe picked up extra shifts. Jean resumed community work. The house, though still avoided by neighbors, stood quiet. But silence doesn't mean peace. One evening in 1974, 4 years after the worst of it, Diane was helping her mother clean the hallway closet when they discovered something strange. A loose wooden panel behind a stack of old coats. When they pulled it aside, a narrow crawl space appeared, low, dusty, dark. They hadn't known it existed. Jean fetched a flashlight. Dust and cobwebs clung to the narrow opening. On hands and knees, Joe crawled inside. The space led to a shallow chamber between walls, perhaps an unfinished part of the original house plans. At the center of the dirt floor was something disturbing. An old rusted iron ring bolted into the stone beneath. It looked ancient, almost ceremonial. They later learned from historical records that the house was built near, or possibly directly atop, the site of the original town gallows. The ring may have been used to bind prisoners awaiting execution. Possibly even the monk himself. After that discovery, Diane's nightmares returned. She dreamt of being dragged by invisible hands through the narrow crawl space, of the hooded figure standing at the end of her bed, whispering words she couldn't understand, of choking darkness and crying children. Jean tried to dismiss it. Old trauma stirred up again, but that very week the strange sounds resumed. Light bulbs exploded, cold spots returned, and then, one night, Diane was found outside, barefoot in the street, staring at the house as though it weren't her own. When her parents asked what she was doing, she simply said, "He wants me back." The monk, it seemed, was stirring again. Word began to spread. Paranormal investigators, drawn by whispers and rumors, arrived with cameras, recorders, and gadgets. One team from London claimed they caught the image of a hooded figure reflected in a glass cabinet, despite no one being in the room. Another group left in the middle of the night, refusing to explain what they had seen. The lead investigator told Jean, "This thing doesn't just haunt, it possesses the space, and it remembers." Local legend grew around the monk. Children dared each other to knock on the door of number 30 East Drive and run. Some claimed to hear chanting. Others swore they saw a face in the upstairs window. Then came the discovery of the well. A former town councilman revealed that beneath several homes on the estate were sealed medieval wells, used by monks centuries ago for cleansing rituals, or perhaps something darker. The Pritchard home, he confirmed, was directly above one. No one knew if it had ever been sealed properly. No one wanted to find out. In 1976, the Pritchards moved out for good. They didn't sell the house, they simply left it. Furniture stayed behind, curtains drawn, crucifixes still nailed in every room. The attic door boarded shut. Diane never returned to the street again. She never spoke publicly of what happened, not even as an adult. But the house waited, and it wasn't empty for long. In the late 1990s, new tenants briefly occupied it, a young couple with no idea of its history. They lasted 6 months. The woman later recounted waking up paralyzed in bed, unable to scream, while a tall shadow passed through the room. Her husband was pushed down the stairs 3 separate times. On the day they left, they found a message scratched into the inside of their mirror. "Get out!" It wasn't there the day before. After that, the property remained mostly unoccupied. Paranormal tours began in the 2010s. Guests signed waivers. Investigators set up motion cameras and EMF detectors. Many reported being scratched, touched, or overwhelmed by a sudden urge to flee. Some claimed the monk didn't just haunt the house, he fed off the attention. The more people came looking, the stronger he became. Today, 30 East Drive still stands. The curtains remain drawn. Visitors describe the same cold stairway, the same thudding boots in the attic, the same whisper in the dark, a breathless voice murmuring just behind the ear. And the monk, cloaked in eternal black, is said to still walk those halls, watching, waiting, because you don't escape something like that. You just survive long enough to stop listening to the knocks. The house at 30 East Drive has stood silent for decades, yet it speaks volumes to those who step inside. It is no longer just a haunting, it is a legend. In the 2010s, the property was reopened for paranormal investigations. Leslie, a historian with a fascination for English hauntings, secured access for a documentary. What she and her team experienced would never make it to mainstream television because the footage was deemed too disturbing. One camera, left alone in the master bedroom, caught what they believed was a tall figure moving between frames, cloaked, heavy, with no visible face. Another recorded loud breathing and chanting in Latin, though no one present could read or speak the language. During the night, Leslie herself was found on the floor, unresponsive, clutching a rosary that had not been brought into the house. She swore, once recovered, that she had seen the monk standing over her, whispering the same 3 words again and again. "It's not over." Researchers later traced the monk's origins back to the 16th century. According to one theory, he was a Cluniac monk from a nearby priory, one who committed unspeakable crimes. Some claim he assaulted and murdered a young girl. Others believe he was falsely accused and executed unjustly. He was hanged on gallows once located exactly where 30 East Drive now sits. His name was never recorded, his face never captured in art. But witnesses always describe the same terrifying figure, a man in a black habit, face obscured by a hood, with a presence that weighs on the soul like a lead shroud. A psychic once called him the embodiment of vengeance. In 2016, a well-known skeptic named Colin Marsh booked the house for a personal test. His goal was to disprove the entire legend by spending 48 hours alone in the home with 0 equipment, no EMF readers, no night vision, just a notepad. He made it through the first night. On the second, neighbors reported hearing frantic pounding from inside around 3 a.m. When Colin was found the next morning, he had barricaded himself in the kitchen, lights on, all drawers and cupboards emptied and stacked against the door. He refused to speak of what happened. But in the months that followed, he was never the same. He withdrew from the public eye, gave up his YouTube channel, and reportedly left his job. In his final post, he simply wrote, "There's something in that house that sees you before you see it. Don't go looking for it." Despite the fear, the monk's legend continues to attract attention. Thrill seekers, paranormal experts, spiritualists, even curious skeptics. Some are scratched, others pushed. and a few feel something worse. One guest, a woman named Samantha who visited during a Halloween event, claimed she felt something enter her. She blacked out in Diane's old room, and when she woke up, her voice had changed, deeper, monotone. She was removed from the house by staff and later taken to a hospital, where she suffered violent seizures for hours. Doctors found no physical cause. She has not spoken publicly since. So why does it continue? Some believe the monk is no ghost, but something darker, a manifestation of centuries of pain, death, and spiritual rot. A being drawn not just to trauma, but to attention. The more people tell his story, the stronger he becomes. Others suggest the land itself is cursed, its soil soaked in injustice. If the monk was wrongfully killed, his rage has grown over 500 years into a sentient, malicious force. There's also a theory that 30 East Drive sits on a crossing of ley lines, mystical energy pathways believed to amplify paranormal activity. Whatever the truth, the house is still active, still watched, still feared. In recent years, the house's new caretaker, Bill Bungay, keeps it open for investigators but treats it with reverence. Every visitor is warned, no taunting, no rituals, no summoning, and most importantly, do not go into the crawl space, because no matter how quiet the house may seem, sometimes at 3 a.m. you can still hear footsteps from the attic. The monk is waiting. He always was. He always will be.